So, imagine a single stretch of land that birthed Apple, Google, Meta, and OpenAI. It's honestly kind of hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? I mean, this one relatively small geographic region on Earth produces more billionaires, millionaires, and world-changing companies than pretty much anywhere else. Today, we're going to unpack the phenomenal rise of Silicon Valley in this explainer, tracking its wild journey from quiet agricultural lands to a literal trillion-dollar empire.
How exactly did an ordinary farming valley become the undisputed tech capital of the world? Well, I'll tell you right now, it wasn't an accident. It was this crazy cocktail of specific catalysts, brilliant minds, and a radical cultural shift that took a quiet little hub and turned it into an absolute powerhouse of human innovation. We're going to track that exact transformation.
You know, a century ago, this region in Northern California wasn't famous for microchips. Folks actually called it the Valley of Heart's Delight. It was thousands and thousands of acres of apricot, peach, and plum orchards. At one point, it actually produced a third of the world's prunes. There were zero venture capitalists, just farmers living in small towns. When you look at the sheer contrast to today's landscape, the bleeding edge of AI and ultra-fast-paced startups, the difference is just staggering.
The seeds for this whole transformation really trace back to 1885 with the founding of Stanford University. See, unlike the traditional East Coast Ivy Leagues that were mostly focused on preparing students to climb already established corporate ladders, Stanford was doing something profoundly different right out of the gate. They were pushing students to invent their own ladders and just build entirely new industries from scratch.
Professor Frederick Terman had this simple, honestly pretty rebellious vision for his engineering students. Turn your ideas into businesses. And he didn't just preach this philosophy, he actively lived it. Terman famously took his own money and invested it into two of his students, maybe you've heard of them, Bill Hewlett and David Packard, helping them build their first audio oscillator in a garage. It's exactly why Terman is rightfully remembered today as the father of Silicon Valley.
Now, the physical foundation of this modern empire actually wasn't software at all. It was silicon. Back in the 1950s and 60s, this region basically cornered the global market on manufacturing silicon semiconductor chips, which were rapidly replacing those clunky, old vacuum tubes in electronics. The sheer density of these new, cutting-edge manufacturers, all clustering together in one place, that led to a natural, indelible nickname for the region that has stuck around ever since.
So if Stanford was the seed, Fairchild Semiconductor, founded in 1957, was absolutely the spark. It was started by a rebellious group of incredibly talented engineers known as the Traitorous Eight, and they completely revolutionized commercial chip manufacturing. But their real, lasting legacy wasn't just the physical hardware they made. It was actually a profound cultural shift that they set in motion. These engineers essentially birthed a phenomenon that became known as the Fairchildren. Basically, these brilliant minds realized they didn't have to stay stuck at a massive, bureaucratic corporation. They could take their expertise, leave, and build their own agile companies. For example, two of those original Fairchildren, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore, left to found Intel. This dynamic sparked a massive, multiplying web of innovation, where one successful company essentially seeded dozens more.
And that kind of compounding innovation, that set the stage for three accelerating modern technological leaps that would completely define the global economy: the personal computer revolution, the massive consumer internet boom, and today's breakneck race for artificial intelligence.
First up, the 1970s kicked off the PC revolution. It all started pretty modestly, with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak literally soldering circuit boards in a Los Altos garage to build the very first Apple computer. That sort of DIY hardware hacker ethos completely paved the way for enterprise giants like Oracle, Cisco, and Adobe to emerge shortly after. They were aggressively building out the essential digital infrastructure that would soon connect the entire globe.
Then, by the 1990s, the Valley capitalized on all that infrastructure it had built to usher in the consumer internet boom. Companies like Google, PayPal, and eventually Netflix didn't just build faster hardware, they fundamentally rewired global society. They completely transformed how humanity searches for information, how we handle digital finance, and how we consume media.
And today, that relentless momentum has funneled straight into the age of artificial intelligence, with companies like OpenAI, NVIDIA, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, Tesla, and Meta all fiercely competing. The Valley is architecting what experts believe is going to be a shift as fundamental to human life as the discovery of electricity. We are literally watching the next great leap happen in real time.
But here's the thing, the hardware and the software, those are just the outputs. The hidden engine driving this whole shebang is a hyper-unique ecosystem of venture capital and startup culture. It's a chaotic, high-stakes environment where young entrepreneurs work obsessively out of dorm rooms and coffee shops, trying to build the next global giant, all fueled by massive, massive financial risk.
It literally all comes down to the brutal, frankly counterintuitive math of venture capital, the power law. See, investors write these massive checks for incredibly risky ideas, fully expecting up to 90% of those startups to completely fail. And they do it because that one single runaway success, the 1 out of 100, generates such extraordinary returns that it pays for all the failures combined, creating total behemoths like Uber and Airbnb.
But what actually makes that extreme financial risk tolerable is a massive psychological shift. In Silicon Valley, failure is completely destigmatized. A failed startup isn't a career ender. It's not a mark of shame. It's treated as an elite education. That vital psychological safety net actively encourages bold, swing-for-the-fences innovation, and it's a huge magnet for the world's absolute top talent.
Okay, so how do we actually distill a century of historic growth into an actionable playbook? Well, there are 5 core lessons hidden in Silicon Valley's remarkable rise that literally anyone can extract and apply to modern business, leadership, and innovation.
First, it begins with an unrelenting curiosity, always asking, what if? But, curiosity requires the freedom to stumble, recognizing that failure is simply a stepping stone to the right answer. Third, a great idea is basically worthless without brutal, focused execution. Fourth, you can only execute at the highest level if you surround yourself with world-class talent. And finally, the Valley's greatest secret is scale. Don't just build to solve a local inconvenience. Build from day one to solve a problem for 1 billion people.
Today, pretty much every smartphone, AI model, and cloud network carries the DNA of this one singular geographic region. It took decades of synergy between rebellious engineers, universities, and risk-takers to turn quiet fruit orchards into the vanguard of the future. The ultimate lesson of Silicon Valley is that the greatest wealth isn't extracted from the ground, it's engineered from ideas. So as we wrap up this explainer, what idea are you holding on to right now that can change your world?